Immediately after coming to power, Yazid started demanding the oath of allegiance, bay'ah, from one and all by means of force, threat, or bribes, including the grandson of the Prophet Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Paying allegiance was an old Arab practice that was carried out in important matters, such as that of rulership and authority. Those who were ruled, and especially the well-known among them, would give their hand in allegiance, agreement and obedience to their king, or the one in authority, and in this way would show their wholehearted support for his actions without any opposition to him. Acknowledging Yazid would have implied according sanctity to all his sinful deeds by none other than the grandson of Prophet Muhammad salawatullah alayhi wa alih, the messenger of Allah, and which would in future have constituted the tenets of Islam. Almost all of the Muslim community had pledged the oath of allegiance to Yazid, some under influence of wealth and status, while others under pressure. Thus, allegiance was demanded from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and he had a firm no. This no of the Imam had enraged Yazid. But why? Apparently, Hussein's single vote mattered very little. But no, it mattered very much, as it was not simply a vote, it was a veto. It would have been a confirmation of his actions and caliphate by none other than the only surviving grandson of the Holy Prophet, and the most powerful candidate to the caliphate, who was more entitled to succeeding his grandfather than Yazid himself. Imam Hussein alayhi salam strongly protested against this in the following words: Yazid is corrupt, habitually drunk, killer of innocents, and notorious for his vices. A person like me can under no circumstances agree to take the oath of allegiance to such an immoral and debased person like Yazid. Allegiance to Yazid was death to Islam, and the affirmation of his rule was a negation of all ethical and moral values. Mas'udi says that whoever accepted the slavery of Yazid by swearing fealty at his hands was spared, otherwise he was subjugated. Thus, the meaning of allegiance to Yazid was not merely the acceptance of a new caliph, but it meant to sell one's religion and faith in slavery to a tyrant. It was left to Imam Hussein alayhi salam that he should either swear the oath of allegiance to the tyrant Yazid, and thus lead a humiliated life, or be killed, and thus attain the great felicity, martyrdom, and immortality. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam most generously replied, death with honor is better than a life of degradation. Thus he was forced to leave his hometown, Medina, and seek refuge in the sacred sanctuary, Kaaba, but was compelled to depart from there too and settle at a land devoid of water or vegetation, named Karbala. Imam Hussein alayhi salam said, surely this is the plain I was in quest of. This is the plain where my holy grandfather salawatullahi alayhi wa alih had prophesied that I, with all my companions, will lay slain. Here will the garden of Fatima alayha salam be cut and destroyed. I cannot and I will not
move from this place. I have reached the destined destination.
Vehemently pursued, Imam Hussein alayhi salam ultimately found himself a reluctant party to the greatest battle of all times, a struggle of truth against falsehood, humanity against villainy, righteousness against evil, justice against corruption. The grandson of Holy Prophet Muhammad salawatullah alayhi wa alih stood in the scorching heat of Karbala along with 72 of his companions, thirsty and weary, but with a firm determination, against the huge army of 70,000 men, satiated and well equipped with arms. His friends, companions, brothers, sons, nephews, including his 6-month-old baby, fell martyr, one after the other, zealously offering their lives for truth. Even after this, the Imam's strong determination and resolute stand could not be repressed. Time and again through his speeches he relentlessly made them see the truth. He invited them towards righteousness and forbade them from evil and immorality, but they were heedless and obstinate in their ignorance. Now Hussein stood alone in the desert of Karbala, in the midst of the forces of evil and corruption. But before laying down his life, he displayed to them his unique valor that he had inherited from his father, and pushed back the army, until voices of request sprang from amidst them. One of those who fought the battle of Karbala against him says, I have never seen a person bereaved of his sons, menfolk, and his companions more lion-hearted than him. The foot soldiers were scattering to his right and left like goats when a wolf come upon them. It was the voice of Allah the Almighty that called out to him, saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. O serene soul, return to your Lord well pleased with him, well pleasing him. So enter among my servants and enter into my paradise. Surah Al-Fajr, verses 27-30. Hearing this, Imam sheathed his sword and bowed down his head in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Seeing this, the enemies pounced upon him like hungry wolves and cut off his sacred head, while still in prostration. Thus Hussein was martyred, but his concept, aim, ideology, and above all the truth prevailed. Some men think that at Karbala Imam Hussein lost the battle, but if one tries to understand the personalities of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and Yazid in the light of their respective aims and objectives for which they fought the battle, Hussein was decidedly the victor in the fulfillment of his objectives. The mission of Hussein was not to allow Yazid to undo the spiritual and moral treasure of Islam, which the latter was bent upon destroying. Hussein faced the worst types of oppression. He suffered death and destruction. His immediate relatives were subjected to torture and butchery. His womenfolk and tender children were humiliated and taken captives. But the cumulative forces of coercion could not deter him from fulfilling his objectives. One cannot also ignore the complete resolve and unflinching faith that these womenfolk, led by Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam and Sayyida Kulthum alayhi salam, the sisters of Imam, and the tender children displayed in the objectives that Hussein stood for at Karbala and much after that. Even these frail and tender members of the household of Hussein had to pass through untold trials and torment, and have made sacrifices that are unparalleled in the annals of history. With his blood, Hussein saved the richest and the noblest possession of mankind, spiritualism. By his sacrifices, Hussein created a new manifesto for men and women of the entire world and for all times to come. Soren Kierkegaard had truly said, quote unquote, "The tyrant dies and his rule ends. The martyr dies and his rule begins." At this juncture of human history, when humanity has achieved a significant position on account of its advancement in the field of knowledge, it can better understand Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his ideals. Beyond doubt, the world has progressed in the field of science and technology. But in social and moral fields, there has been no considerable improvement. Frustration is the general theme, and people appear to be groaning under the stress of malaise. Further, materialism seems to have eaten up the vitals of life. The only remedy is spiritualism, and where there is spiritualism, there is Husseinism. Those who are groping in the dark and are in search of light and life may approach Hussein, for he provides both. It is now up to all to maintain his remembrance, their grand legacy, Aza, passed on to us by the infallible Imams alayhim salam and the eminent scholars. We should thus preserve its honor and sanctity, and above all, voice our protest against any kind of injustice and immorality which prevails in the society, in one form or the other, thus following the footsteps of the master of martyrs, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, who is a paradigm of truth, morality, humanity, justice, and righteousness. Ayatollah al-Uzma Sayyid Ruhullah Musawi al-Khomeini says, quote unquote, "Let Ashura mourning gatherings in commemoration of the martyr of noblemen and the oppressed, Imam al-Hussein, be held with increasing attendance and splendor, for these ceremonies mark the triumph of reason over ignorance, justice over tyranny, trust against treason, and Islamic rule over that of despot. Let the blood-smeared flags of Ashura be hoisted higher and higher as token of the arrival of the day for the oppressed to take their vengeance against oppression." Lastly, as Ben Jonson says, quote unquote, "Who falls for the love of God shall rise a star."